Chapter 5. The Doghouse. When Sally finished whistling, she felt much better. Now that her fear had been pushed back, there was a strange sense of adventure and peace. She didn't feel alone, even though she was by herself in a strange neighborhood inside a smelly doghouse. Something happy welled up inside Sally, and she laughed out loud. Sally realized that she was completely free for the first time in her young life. She was free to stay, or free to crawl out and go knock on a door for help. Maybe she could even find a police officer to take her home. Sally knew that her own choices had gotten her into this smelly doghouse in a strange neighborhood, and she loved the idea that she had done it all by herself. She knew that she couldn't be very far from home, and that thought gave her some comfort. But if she followed that thought's inviting footpath, she knew she'd find herself thinking about home and feeling incredibly sad that she had missed Rennie's birthday dinner. As much as she hated the fact that Rennie seemed to get all the attention in the family, she really did love her baby sister. She loved how Rennie often gazed at her with admiration in her eyes, how she laughed easily at Sally's antics, and how she watched everything Sally did and tried to copy her. It sometimes made Sally's heart hurt to see that Rennie couldn't do all the things that she could. Some mess-up in Rennie's brain that adults called complications after Rennie's second heart surgery had left her with less control over her body than before. So it had taken her forever to learn how to walk without her walker, and she still couldn't jump high without falling down or climb on the monkey bars by herself. Sally thought about the last time she went with Mom and Rennie to get Rennie's blood draw. Rennie was on special medicine that made her blood thinner than normal so that her special heart valve could work right. Rennie had to go to the lab to get blood taken out of her arm with a needle at least once a month, sometimes more. Last time she was at the lab with them, Sally had been especially good at distracting Rennie from crying while the man in the white coat poked Rennie's arm. Sally loved the praise she got from Mom when she helped, and the lollipop she got afterward. But it really bothered her to see the blood come out of her little sister's arm into the syringe. No, 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 she was not going to think about that or Rennie's upcoming heart surgery. That made her way, way too scared. And wasn't it the thought of fear that had freaked her out earlier and made her run away from Gwen? She did not want to think about how scared she was that Rennie might die. That would give her fear too much of a chance to freak out again. Sally made herself remember the really cool story Gwen had told her just before she clicked on the video and Sally's fear attack thing hit. It was about that man named Rick with no arms or legs, whose website they were looking at on the computer. Gwen had enlarged a picture where Rick and a little boy with no arms or legs were standing on the stage facing each other. Gwen had been at the actual meeting and told how beautiful it was to see Rick encouraging that little boy, who was just like him, to live a full and thankful life. Sally had been drawn into the expressions on each boy's face in the picture. Both looked like they suddenly understood an advanced math problem, or had just correctly spelled a really hard spelling word, or got praise from their daddy for doing something amazing. Something in both of their faces sang a lovely duet to her heart, and Sally really liked it. She stayed there with Rick and the little boy in her imagination for a really long time, singing silly songs with them and pulling on their courage. She figured if they could live a whole life without arms and legs, she could spend one night in a smelly doghouse by herself. The more she thought of Rick and the boy, the warmer and toastier Sally got. Her eyes grew heavy, and she yawned a big yawn. Realizing it must be way past her bedtime, Sally pulled Gwen's sweater close around her, laid down with her back to the wall of the doghouse, curled up, and drifted off to sleep. Sally wasn't sure how she got into her I'm right land, but there she was, lying in a field of tall, mint-colored grass. The light blue sky looked like chalk, and the muted tones all around her felt very familiar. Something scratchy touched her foot, and Sally sat up to see a calico kitty sitting next to her bare feet and gazing at her. Sally wondered where her Batman boots went, but was immediately drawn into the kitty's antics. It crouched and wiggled its bottom like it was going to pounce. It leapt toward her belly, and Sally fell back again easily into the soft grass. She rolled and wrestled with the kitty happily. This brought all sorts of other kitties roaming through the endless field to play as well. Sally loved all the feline attention and cooed joyfully with their purrs. But then the purrs started to sound like snarls. It was subtle at first, but got louder, circling her and closing in. Sally tried to struggle to her feet, but the kitties that had been romping on her moments before had somehow turned to invisible monsters that held her down. The more she struggled, the tighter they got, and the louder the growling became. Sally was truly scared now, not knowing what to do. But then an idea hit her in the head like a snowball. She took a deep breath and yelled as loud as she could, "Daddy, help!" Sally woke with a start and bumped the back of her head onto something hard. She thought she heard another bump and some snorty noises from behind her. It took a few minutes for her to remember where she was, and to push her heart back down her throat into her chest. She pulled Gwen's sweater tightly around her and buried her head in her arms. The fabric felt heavier and warmer somehow. She absolutely was not going to open her eyes. She did not want to see if any of the monsters from under her bed had found her sleeping in this doghouse. Oh, how she wished she had Rafa with her to scare them away. As she squeezed her eyelids tight, she remembered something from earlier. Gwen and Sam's mom had shut their eyes earlier when they were talking to God. Sally remembered that she hadn't seen God come out of his hiding place, and she had an idea. Maybe he was still playing hide-and-seek somewhere nearby. "Okay, God," she whispered, "if you are still around here somewhere, I decree ollie ollie oxen free. Come out wherever you are." Suddenly, it was like someone had poured warm honey all over Sally's body. It felt wonderful. Sally fell back asleep immediately, feeling safe and protected. Sally was back in the land of I'm right, but this time her daddy was sitting crisscross applesauce on the grass, holding her in his lap. Sally's head was on his chest, close to his heart. He was in his normal geek t-shirt and jeans. She snuggled in closer. Sally absolutely loved the feeling of being in her daddy's arms. Usually at home, it was when they were watching TV, so she never heard his heartbeat because she was focusing on Transformers or Justice League or something. But here, in the stillness, she could hear it loud and strong. It sounded like a bass drum from a marching band, keeping the rhythm for her own small heart to follow. She felt like her heart wanted to leap up and march to the beat of Daddy's heart. So Sally looked up into Daddy's face. She was surprised at how beautiful he looked. His face was soft and gentle, with an expression more tender than Sally had ever seen. The love and kindness she saw in his eyes as he gazed down at her made her stop breathing for a moment. It was like she and Daddy were the only ones on the planet, and the whole world revolved around them. Daddy smiled, and Sally's lungs got back to work. She took a deep breath and then remembered why she'd looked up. Daddy knew her thoughts, and suddenly they were both up on their feet, dancing and twirling. Well, Daddy was on his feet. Sally's were dangling below her because Daddy was holding her up high in his arms. Sally noticed that she had on her beautiful flowery Christmas dress and her favorite shoes, the shiny black ones with the little heel. Happy memories from when she had last worn that outfit came flooding at her, and she laughed right out loud. This made Daddy laugh loud and long. He was dressed up now, too, in his black sport coat, black pants, and blue shirt that matched Sally's eyes. Boy, did he look handsome. Sally realized that Daddy hadn't said a word this whole time. Just as she was about to ask him why, he put her down in front of him, put his big hands on her little shoulders, looked lovingly into her eyes, and said, "Sally girl, I love you." Sally felt all warm and toasty inside, barely hearing the fuzzy chirp of a faraway bird. As she slowly woke up, she tried to grab all the lovely feelings from her blurry dreams. It felt like the feeling she got in the candy store, the pet store, and the toy store, all rolled into one. The bird got louder and louder until finally Sally let go of the delicious dream world and opened her eyes. A happy arc of warm sunlight was almost touching her nose, and she smelled the delicious aroma of blueberry muffins. "That's weird," she said out loud. The sound of her voice surprised her. This doghouse was much smellier last night, she thought. But then she saw it. An actual, real-life blueberry muffin sitting on a white napkin right next to her nose. Sally sat up and noticed that her blue fleece blanket with pink hearts on it was on top of her. "How could this be?" she thought. "This ought to be on my top bunk at home." Her brilliant self had the answer right away, and she knew what must have happened. The Tooth Fairy must have found out that Sally gave her tooth money to the orphans in Guatemala last night. She must have liked Sally's generosity so much that she asked her good friends, the Blanket Fairy and the Blueberry Muffin Fairy, to make a delivery. Sally was impressed that the fairies could find her even in a doghouse in a strange neighborhood, and she loved that they brought her favorite blanket and favorite breakfast to her. Sally thanked the fairies out loud, even though she knew they were long gone, and took a big bite right out of the top of the muffin.